Hey, wake up. It's Means Morning News. Just after 11 a.m. on the East Coast, I'm Sam Sachs, serving up your recommended dose of anti-capitalist news. One MMN a day keeps the dang doctor away. And we begin at Columbia University, which once again sicked the NYPD on students demonstrating against the genocide in Gaza. Around 100 protesters began an occupation of a library on campus Wednesday afternoon to call attention to the school's support for apartheid Israel. The action was organized by the student group Columbia University Apartheid Divest, or CUAD. In a statement online, CUAD said, quote, "The flood shows that as long as Columbia funds and profits from imperialist violence, the people will continue to disrupt Columbia's profits and legitimacy. Repression breeds resistance. If Columbia escalates repression, the people will continue to escalate disruptions on this campus." The group issued a number of demands, including the school fully divest from Israeli apartheid and genocide, amnesty for students and faculty targeted by Columbia's free speech repression campaign, and cops and ICE off campus. But the university responded by bringing more cops on campus. A swarm of NYPD officers descended on the library to violently arrest the protesters. At least 2 demonstrators were injured, according to the Columbia Daily Spectator. Police arrested roughly 80 others. It's the largest mass arrest on campus since last year, when the NYPD cleared other anti-genocide student protests on campus. The mass arrests sparked more protests, including a pro-Palestinian march around the school. University President Claire Shipman claimed the demonstrations were anti-Semitic and that the school condemns all forms of hate and discrimination. Well, not all forms. The school is in business with Israel, an apartheid state carrying out a genocide. The Columbia president's smear against anti-genocide protesters only helps fuel a reactionary repression campaign directed by the highest echelons of power in the U.S., the White House and Congress. In fact, on the morning of the protests, Republicans in the House convened another sham hearing alleging that anti-Semitism is rampant on college campuses. And by anti-Semitism, they just mean opposition to genocide and support for Palestinian rights. But conservatives, along with many in the Democratic Party, have used this specter of anti-Semitism to crack down on pro-Palestinian speech on campus, and the Trump administration has used it to cut off federal funding to certain universities, and even to arrest and indefinitely detain student protesters who weren't born in the U.S. but have legal status to live and study here, like former Columbia student Mahmoud Khalil, who's been in ICE detention since mid-March. Columbia University itself has also suspended, expelled, and revoked degrees from students involved in anti-genocide protests on campus. Next up, Elon Musk has unlocked a new level of corruption. The richest man in the world spent hundreds of millions of dollars helping Donald Trump get elected, and in return, the government is helping him secure multi-billion-dollar business deals. The Washington Post reported this week that the State Department is pushing countries around the world to approve contracts for Elon Musk's satellite internet service, Starlink. And these discussions are taking place amid broader trade talks with nations hoping to see tariffs reduced. According to internal memos the paper obtained, the State Department has not made the ask explicit, but countries have received the message that striking a deal with Musk is a way to get more favorable deals with the U.S. In one memo related to trade talks with the African nation of Lesotho, an official wrote, quote, As the government of Lesotho negotiates a trade deal with the United States, it hopes that licensing Starlink demonstrates goodwill and intent to welcome U.S. businesses. And here's what the Post reported on trade negotiations with India, where Starlink stands to gain billions in new contracts. Quote, in India, government officials have sped through approvals of Starlink with the understanding that doing so could help them cement trade deals with the administration. Quote, the Indian side sees this as an important lubricant that facilitates a deal, said one of the people briefed on the matter by Indian leadership. The administration defended the overtures on behalf of Starlink. In a statement to the Post, the State Department said, quote, any patriotic American should want to see an American company's success on the global stage, especially over compromised Chinese competitors. Well, countries should probably assume that Starlink is compromised too, or at least SpaceX is, given its close ties to the U.S. military-industrial complex. In fact, as SpaceX pursues commercial internet satellite contracts for Starlink all around the world, it also has a contract to build spy satellites for U.S. intel agencies. Moving on now to Capitol Hill, where a new report from the Congressional Budget Office reveals the extent of damage Republicans may inflict on the Medicaid program. The party has instructed lawmakers on the House Energy and Commerce Committee to find $880 billion in cuts over the next 10 years in order to help pay for President Trump's tax cuts for the rich, bloated defense budget, and mass deportations. Those so-called savings are impossible to achieve without deep cuts to Medicaid, which the committee oversees. A number of GOP proposals are floating around, and Democrats asked the CBO to analyze how each would affect the program. The first option is reducing the share of costs paid by the federal government to provide Medicaid to expanded populations under the Affordable Care Act. Currently, the federal medical assistance percentage, or FMAP, is at 90%. If it was reduced to the same level as regular Medicaid, which is between 50 and 77%, that would indeed save the federal government about $860 billion. But it would also lead to as many as 5.5 million more people losing their health insurance over the next 10 years. Another option under consideration is to reduce the taxes states collect on medical providers to fund their Medicaid programs, which would result in nearly 4 million people losing their insurance. Then there are ideas to cap federal spending for the entire Medicaid population or just for the expanded Medicaid population. Again, under those scenarios, the government would indeed save hundreds of billions of dollars. Money that could be used for war and tax cuts for the rich, but it would come at a huge cost to the general population. Millions losing their Medicaid coverage, going uninsured, and possibly becoming one of the 40,000 or so Americans who die each year because they don't have health insurance. Latest reports are congressional Republicans have already tabled some of these proposals, realizing how politically toxic they are. But one option still under consideration is implementing work requirements on the Medicaid population. A prior CBO analysis of that plan found it would produce savings of only about $100 billion while pushing 600,000 people off the insurance rolls. And finally, U.S. spies are training their listening devices on Greenland. The Wall Street Journal reported on a top-secret directive sent down from the Office of Director of National Intelligence to agency heads to focus on Greenland, which President Trump has repeatedly threatened to annex since he took office. This is from the Journal. Quote, several high-ranking officials under Director of National Intelligence Tulsi Gabbard issued a collection emphasis message to intelligence agency heads last week, They were directed to learn more about Greenland's independence movement and attitudes on American resource extraction on the island. The classified message asked agencies, whose tools include surveillance satellites, communications intercepts, and spies on the ground, to identify people in Greenland and Denmark who support U.S. objectives for the island. So that likely means Greenland's population of about 56,000 people will be subjected to bulk collection surveillance. Trump has claimed the U.S. needs to take over Greenland, which is a territory of fellow NATO member Denmark, for national security purposes. During a recent interview with NBC News, the president refused to rule out seizing the island through military force. Well, if that happens, J.D. Vance should be the first paratrooper dropped in. Now, a disturbing reminder that cops can still beat a person to death on video and mostly get away with it. A jury found 3 former Memphis police officers, Tadarius Bean, Demetrius Haley, and Justin Smith, not guilty of second-degree murder in the beating death of 29-year-old Tyree Nichols back in January 2023. A poll camera captured video of the vicious attack, showing multiple Memphis cops kicking, punching, and clubbing Nichols for an extended period of time. Afterward, as Nichols was writhing in pain, critically injured, calling for his mother for help, the cops joked with each other about how many licks they got in on him. They also failed to render medical aid and didn't inform EMTs on scene later of the extent of Nichols' injuries. Nichols died 3 days later. The violent assault occurred after Nichols tried to flee from a traffic stop. 5 cops were involved in the beating, but 2 agreed to take a plea deal in exchange for their testimony, which ended up subverting the prosecution's case, either intentionally or not. Defense attorneys argued that one of the officers who took the deal, Emmett Martin, was most responsible for Nichols' death. Martin could be seen kicking and punching Nichols in the head several times. Martin's role in the beating deflected some of the blame from the defendants, which contributed to their exoneration. So basically, prosecutors took the cop most likely to be convicted of murder, gave him a plea deal in exchange for lesser charges, which undermined their case against the other officers involved in Nichols' killing. 3 cops acquitted on state charges were convicted last year on federal charges related to the beating and could still be sentenced to years in prison. But in that case, too, the officers evaded the most serious charges and were only found guilty of lesser charges of witness tampering and obstruction of justice. Finding accountability for killer cops is only going to get more difficult with Trump in the White House. The president signed an executive order recently to, quote, unleash the police on American cities, which includes more legal protections and even pro bono representation from private law firms for cops charged with excessive force. President Trump is set to appoint an inside man at FedEx to head up the U.S. Postal Service, a move that is being slammed by the largest union of letter carriers as a massive conflict of interest. Privatization of the post office has long been a goal of the right in order to destroy a bastion of organized labor and boost the bottom lines of for-profit delivery companies. And with David P. Steiner reported to be Trump's choice to be the next Postmaster General, well, capitalists may finally get what they've long sought. According to the Washington Post, Steiner is the leading candidate and was recommended for the job by FedEx, a direct competitor of the USPS. Steiner has been serving as a member of FedEx's corporate board. In a statement, the National Association of Letter Carriers which represents nearly 300,000 active and retired mail workers, said it was outraged by the decision. The union called Steiner's appointment a step toward handing America's mail system over to private interests. Quote, "This isn't just bad policy. It's a direct assault on the workers who keep the mail moving and the public connected. The damage will hit rural communities hardest, where the Postal Service isn't just a convenience, it's a lifeline. And make no mistake, if this appointment stands, it threatens 7.9 million jobs tied to the postal industry and service to over 300 million Americans." The union also noted Steiner's history as the CEO of Waste Management, where he was an aggressive enemy of organized labor, busting unions and automating jobs away. The U.S. Post Office currently boasts the largest unionized workforce in the country. The Postal Board of Governors, which oversees the service, and the Postmaster General, is made up of 9 members. Currently, there are 4 vacancies and 1 temporary seat, all of which can be filled by President Trump, giving him significant control over how the U.S. Postal Service will operate. Trump has already moved to fill 1 board seat, nominating businessman and Republican Party financier Anthony Lomangino to the post. Lomangino is involved in multiple waste management companies in Florida and has been dubbed the Trash Kingpin. For this week in working class history, we're headed back to 1912, New York City, for the waiters' strike. It was the first industry-wide strike of waiters and hotel workers in the city. The IWW organized the labor action and formed the affiliated International Hotel Workers Union, or IHWU. It all began with 300 workers walking out of the Hotel Belmont, but quickly grew into a disruptive force that shut down nearly 100 establishments in the city. More than 6,000 waiters, cooks, and other hotel workers were involved. They presented their demands to the hotel owners, who had organized themselves into an interest group known as the Hotel Men's Association. The demands included union recognition, $10 of base pay per week for waiters, 1 day off per week, sanitary accommodations for workers, overtime pay, a prohibition on workers being fired without pay owed to them, also no fines. At the time, waiters in fancy hotel restaurants would get fined if they dropped utensils or plates. The strike lasted for more than a month until the hotel owners agreed to comply with nearly all of the workers' demands, except one: refused to recognize the union. Workers accepted the offer anyway, taking the gains they could get and living to fight on another day for union recognition. And fight they would. Waiters and hotel workers would go on to strike again several years later in 1918, again in 1929, and again in 1934. And then in 1938, they succeeded in forcing the hotel owners to accept the union, and a year later, secured their first labor contract. Thanks as always to the team at Working Class History for giving us access to their archives. You can find them on social media at Working Class History for more information on the New York waiters' strike and other events that happened this week in history, including the birth of Karl Marx in 1818, the start of the 1894 Pullman Railroad strike in the U.S., and the strike of the 100,000 in Belgium, organized by communists to boost workers' pay and resist Nazi occupation. We'll be back with more next week. All right, friends, the show ends today with a sunrise from Arizona. It was sent in by Kaz in Tucson. Enjoy. Thank you, Kaz. That's the show. Thanks for watching, and thanks to the team behind the scenes. Find more MMN at means.tv. We also have a YouTube and podcast channel, and you can find us on Twitter, Instagram, and Blue Sky. One day capitalism will fall. Until then, we'll be right here. See you tomorrow.